Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you for inviting me and including me in your meeting and event. I'm always privileged and grateful to share my love for the Quran with all of you, my love of reading and thinking and reflection. So I think most of you have recently seen these painful images of ISIS forces destroying statues and historical artifacts and monuments that date back thousands of years to the Assyrian civilization, to the Sumerians, some really priceless remains of these civilizations. And it is very disturbing to see them do this, because they're doing it in the name of Islam, which means in the name of all of us. And they are doing this under the pretense of destroying idols, because for them, being a Muslim means to be iconoclastic, to destroy idols and statues. So for them, they're pretending to be doing something of a religious duty. And at the same time, it is also interesting to see them use these Western tools of electric drills and explosives that are really not Muslim creations. So why use Western tools and not spare these historical artifacts? But as a Muslim, when I see this, I find that it goes against the injunctions in the Quran that actually tell us to travel through the earth and to look at the remains of other cultures and their civilizations, whatever they have left behind. So it is really difficult for us Muslims to see a lot of these things that are being done in the name of Islam. Of course, the most hurtful is to see them commit acts of mass murder and killing and torture and beheadings in the name of Islam. But this is connected to also their destruction of history and memory. And I want to connect it to the Quranic theme of history as a source of knowledge. Because in the Quran, we are given a certain paradigm of the creation of the universe, that it is a certain trajectory coming from a certain point. In Surah Al-Ankabut, we are told that we are actually commanded to travel on the planet, on Earth, and to see how God started creation. And yet a lot of religious people recoil from the idea of looking at fossils or remains or to really search for the signs of how life evolved on this planet. Yet in the Quran we're commanded to do this, to see how creation started. And when we do that, our vision expands of life. Because, for example, the human species evolved from many other species, and it took millions of years. The first erect humanoids that walked on Earth about 3.3 million years. The first Homo sapiens, us, the people who looked like us, were able to speak and had the same size of the frontal cortex, the same shape of skeleton, walked on Earth about 150,000 years ago. And we were also contemporary with other species like the Neanderthals, who died out about 30,000 years ago. So when the Quran tells us to travel through the earth and look at remains and to see the signs of God's creation and that journey of creation, it is also a lesson in humility, because when we see how long our species took to evolve, and then how also short human civilization is in the expanse of that timeline, then it becomes a context in which our understanding expands of where we come from, and therefore the possibilities of where we're heading. So in Surah Ghafir, in verse at the beginning and towards the end, Surah number 40, and I chose these two verses because it deals with historical remains and civilization. But this is verse 21 and verse 82, I think.
No.
Of Surah Ghafir, Surah number 40. And these two verses are part of a repetitive theme of the Quran, which starts normally. These verses start with أَفَلَمْ يَسِيرُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ فَيَنْظُرُوا كَيْفَ كَانَ عَاقِبَةَ الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِهِمْ. Haven't they traveled through the earth and seen the consequences or the end of those who went before them, or who were gone before them? And then we are given different descriptions. It says some of them were much more powerful than you, and they left big remains. And the word used in the Quran is وَآثَارًا. وَآثَارًا in modern Arabic is actually historical remains. We use this word, we even call it وزارة الآثار, the Ministry of Remains or historical remains. It's a certain expression of now the modern term archaeology, or even the historical searches that deal with the remains of other civilizations. But atharan comes from the word, literally from the word traces. So sometimes Muhammad Asad translates it as impact. So impact, whatever impact they left. But it could mean impact in terms of knowledge, that the literature and sciences they left behind, but it could also mean in terms of physical things they left behind. And the reason this is important is that we are told in the Quran that when we do this, we understand the sunnah of God. And this is another term that we tend to misuse in the Muslim tradition. We always think of sunnah in the Muslim tradition as the sunnah of the Prophet. But in the Quran, the word sunnah is never used in relation to the Prophet, because sunnah in Arabic means the way with capital W, which means a pattern or a law that is immutable. And literally in the Quran, we are told the sunnah of God is immutable and shiftable and changeable. Exercise injustices and oppress each other. The Quran, we are told that they are spared, they are awaited patiently, but when they don't align, they are destroyed. In Surah Al-Sajdah, for example, we are told وَلَنُذِيقَنَّهُمْ مِنَ الْعَذَابِ الْأَدْنَى دُونَ الْعَذَابِ الْأَكْبَرِ لَعَلَّهُمْ يَرْجِعُونَ. That we will get them to taste of lesser suffering before the bigger suffering, so that they may reverse course. So we are always given signs before the final destruction, because we live in a patient universe. We are given so much freedom to be creative and to act in so many infinite ways. But the Quran tells us up to a certain point, because if we keep violating, we start seeing the signs of these violations as forms of suffering. But if we don't reverse course, if we don't look at the consequences, and consequences is a key word in the Quran, it's constantly repeated, to examine the consequences of nations before us. We are given we see the consequences of our actions, we see suffering, but if we don't reverse course, then what happens? Bye-bye. That's the final consequence. Bye-bye. Yeah. We are told.
What is consequence in Arabic?
عواقب or عاقبة. كيف كان عاقبة الذين من قبلكم. And so patiently we are given the chance to reverse course, but when we don't, we are told bye-bye. And so that shows a certain paradigm that the Quran presents of the trajectory of human history, that there is a larger plan, and those who don't align, they are given a chance, one after the other, but then eventually they are told to leave the stage of the human journey. And this is the main message that runs through the Quran. And we are given tools to do this. So, for example, we are told that we see our own suffering So the Quran, for example, in Surah Al-Kahf, it says that people spare themselves if they see the consequences of those who went before them, or they see suffering facing them. حتى يأتي يوم العذاب قبلا. And so history then, when we look at it from this perspective, becomes an extremely important vehicle of sparing ourselves suffering. So when we look at the consequences of those nations that have gone before and they violated the laws and what happened to them, then we actually could spare ourselves these consequences. And so this is the repeated theme in the Quran. It's the moral thrust of the Quran, is that God doesn't want us to suffer. There are certain laws, the more we align to them, the more we reduce our suffering, personal and individual. And that the punishments that happen to human beings are not the wishes of God. Because many people always tell us that, why God is so punitive in the Quran? Why there are severe punishments? And I tell them, no, the message of the Quran is to spare ourselves from burning and from suffering. And the Quran is always telling us, spare yourselves from destruction. And in many specific examples, we are told to avoid hell. اتقوا نارا وقودها الناس. About when we think about Islam and history, and Islam is coming across nowadays as a religion that is against science, against knowledge, against history, against statues. If you remember, a few years ago, the Taliban also destroyed the Buddha statues, which is not just historical remains, but the sacred site of another religion. And we are always told to have respect for other religions, not just respect, but the Quran emphasizes the unity of prophethood and the unity of all the messages. But we are told there is diversity in methods and rituals. But it says that nation of prophets is one. إن هي إلا أمتكم أمة واحدة وأنا ربكم فاعبدون. And it says لا نفرق بين أحد من رسله. We don't distinguish any of his prophets. So when we see this kind of universal message and the call to travel through the land and to examine, actually to visit, we are told, to see the remains of other cultures. We see how this is completely the opposite of how Muslims want to erase the past and to pretend we are the only ones, which is completely against the Quranic moral ethos and the Quranic directive, that we are just a small part of a large chain of a long journey of humanity, and we are one species, and those of us who don't align to the will of God end up leaving the journey, no matter how much they pretend to be faithful, because it's not about just our words, it's about the sunnah of God. So if we do certain things, even if we say other things, the consequences are more related to our real practices, our real actions. So if somebody says, I love God, I will jump off this building, will they fly up or fall down? It's as simple as that. And so the Quran presents it this way, that the laws that govern the physical dimension have parallels of the non-physical dimension as well. So therefore, that just because you see yourself not getting hurt the moment you lie or steal, doesn't mean that these actions don't have consequences. And this is the central message of all religious traditions as well, that the moral realm and the behavior of humanity, what God wants us in the Quranic discourse is to stand in our own context and in our own time, in our own, the way to stand within our sensibility and our moral paradigm, and to act to the best of our ability in our time-space reality, not to be bound to those others. And if you notice, that's why throughout the Quran, when a new prophet comes with a new approach, the nation always rejects that prophet, and this is again a repeated theme in the Quran. They always say, but we have found our fathers doing so. They always appeal to tradition and to history. And the Quran always answers by different things, their variations. It says, what if your ancestors, what if your fathers, forefathers, didn't reason? أَوَلَوْ كَانَ آبَاؤُهُمْ لَا يَعْقِلُونَ. And in other contexts it says, what if your forefathers were calling you upon to greater suffering? In other instances it says, what if the forefathers were subscribing to satanic ideas? So this appeal to tradition is really represented in the Quranic discourse as problematic. And this is the core of religious sensibility, the idea to awaken to your own time and to your own conscience, and to act out of that with commitment to truth, and not to be bound to something that manifested in a specific historical context, but to act in response to God. God is not a past verb, a past entity. It's a presence, it's a continuous presence, and we are accountable to that will, and not the will of those people who have gone before us, even if they had been prophets or followers of prophets. This is the clear message of the Quran.
But for many people, Muslims, I am not talking about others, Muslim people don't even know what they believe in. They don't even know to pray. These people have gone backwards in time, and maybe they were worshipping these idols. We don't know. We didn't.
Okay, so what should we do? Because there is also this injunction in the Quran that we do not impose our religious traditions on
I
others.
was just going to draw a reference to Ibrahim. When the people in his time saw they worshiping idols, and he
went and he destroyed the idols.
But he left the biggest one standing. So when they
you know how I interpret that story? He destroyed a lot of the cultural values of his time, but he kept one thing: the eye. That's the biggest idol we all have. I always find a great symbolism in that story, because human beings are willing to destroy so many things except the eye. That is the biggest idol that we have and we hold on to. And so how do we know he destroyed stones? Maybe he destroyed concepts. But the point is, iconoclastic traditions throughout the Semitic traditions represent more than destruction of artwork. They represent the ability to be a counter-cultural voice to injustice and to oppression and to inequalities. So when Rosa Parks refused to actually stand in the box, to me that is an iconoclastic stance, because she broke a big idol of racial inequality. If we really read the biblical text and the Quranic text, we'll notice that the prophets were not concerned about material things, building them or destroying them. Their message was about the moral realm that we were creating and the kind of interaction we were creating, and whether we were creating hierarchical relationships or egalitarian relationships under one God. Yeah.